welcome to another episode of Inflection Point Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Lauren LeBron, or Lauren Rose if you follow me on social media, here with my co-host.
Hello, everyone. Steve Ellis here again, or number one Animaniac on Instagram.
Today, we are going to be talking about boundaries. What's the exact name of our podcast episode today? Forget.
It's just simply titled The Benefits of Boundaries. And it's simple because we're going to discuss in depth what boundaries are, how they're different from limitations, why it's important for everyone to have their own sets of boundaries, how to communicate those boundaries, different types of boundaries you may encounter, what exactly makes up a reasonable boundary and how you set those, as well as how to reinforce those boundaries when you feel someone pushing
them. Awesome. So I guess let's get started with what are boundaries. How I would personally define them is it's almost like a set of rules and guidelines that you would like the people within your life to respect. And there's definitely a difference between trying to be controlling and just having things that boundaries that allow you to be an autonomous person. Because I think that's the biggest issue. I know in my family we didn't have boundaries. Everybody was in everybody's business and we kind of just used everybody's stuff. And when I came out into the real world, I didn't quite understand why everybody was so weird about having their own things. And then I started to realize why it was so important, because people, I was in a relationship where there was no boundaries and I never could find anything. I felt like I had no personality outside of my relationship. So I find boundaries are, and especially in the workforce too. I was that super people pleaser at work. So I was staying late, without getting paid, which is a big one. As a salaried worker, staying till 7 p.m., when my 8 hours ended at 4:30 and not getting paid for it. I mean, granted, it did get me a promotion. However, at what expense? You know what I mean? I had a very young child at home and I wasn't able to see him or spend time with him. And, my relationship kind of fell apart because I couldn't separate work-life balance. I was all about work because I wanted to, I felt like I had something to prove. I wanted to get promotions. I wanted to get a good position financially because I was in survival mode. I was the only one working in that relationship. So, there was a lot of reasons for my lack of boundaries, but they're absolutely vital to life in general, so that you can have a balance between your personal goals and aspirations, and as well as balancing all the people within it and work and your hobbies. What about you? How would you define boundaries?
So with regards to boundaries, I believe that they can be lines that we draw for ourselves in our interactions with other people to protect not only our comfort and our space, but our needs. Because if we don't relate to boundaries, which again, we'll get into how that's different from a limit, you may find that you're not being given what you actually need in life, not just what you want, but what you need. You can also look at it, if we have to use the word limit, as a limit for the kinds of behavior and qualities we will allow in our interactions with other people, the acceptable behaviors, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That's a really good definition. So the next thing would be like, how can we define what the difference is between boundaries and limitations? And I actually had to look this up because I know boundaries are technically limits. So I was like, what are the differences? So I had to take some time and to look up what exactly are the difference between someone who is just putting up limits and what people's limits are versus boundaries. And what I found is limits are more external factors, or more like even physical factors, as in like mental health issues, physical issues, like, you know, someone's limits could be like they literally can't run a 5K because they have some physical limitations, you know, genetic or some kind of disorder, or, you know, medical issue that they can't perform the same way as someone else. And I was like, that's a very good definite, you know, to have it defined that way, because we live in a world where we believe that we are completely limitless, and in a way we kind of are, but there are people with limits, and for us to hold everybody to our standards and say that everybody should be able to do the XYZ is wrong. We can't expect that from everybody because we have no idea what people are working with. And I believe it is a proper boundary to follow, to not ask. We shouldn't have to prove to someone, like carry around a medical card saying, hey, I have this disorder or this limitation, and that's why I can't do this. You know what I mean? I think it's ridiculous that we have to like prove our, like, why we can't do something to people. That's so wrong. And I don't think that anybody should have to like break out a card and say, I have diabetes, or I have, you know, HIV, or whatever it is that's causing you to not be able to perform at the same level as someone, or I have autism. Like, I think it's really disrespectful to ask somebody, well, what is your medical diagnosis that doesn't allow you? And I think in human resources, let me know if I'm wrong, you're not allowed to do that, right? You're not allowed to like force somebody to prove, unless it's like a job that has it as a requirement, right? What is the difference between, like, are you allowed to ask somebody, like, what's your excuse?
So within the realm of human resources, if it's a job related duty, normally a good organization, a professional organization, I should say, is going to present what the duties and responsibilities are within the job posting. Say it's
Right.
something trades related and it requires you to lift up to 50 pounds. When you fill out the application and you certify it, you're signing a contract stating that if you are chosen for this job, you have the capability to perform
Mhm.
the actions necessary in order to accomplish the goals within that job. However, you also have the ability to have reasonable accommodation. So if you need assistance in that, then that's perfectly fine, but you have to present it up front. If something does happen on the job outside of the workman's comp aspect of any related job, you cannot demand that someone perform something that they are not capable of doing. And if there is an issue where you're not able to perform that job, of course, they have to offer you reasonable accommodation through ADA. If you're not able to qualify for ADA, then they have to be able to, at least within the public sector, find you a same level job. If you're not able to do that, then that is the point where they can move to terminate you or force you to resign, whatever works. But you're correct. They cannot openly demand to know your status. They're protected things, your sexual preference, your specific gender, your religion, things that do not relate to your ability to perform the job that you are in. And if any of those boundaries within the workplace are violated, oh boy, expect a legal headache.
I thought so. I knew there was something. That's why I asked you. And in case anybody listening is wondering why I asked him, he works in human resources. If you haven't watched our intro episode, so a lot of times I'll be asking him work related questions because he knows. I'm not just like asking him for fun because I don't, because I'm a stay at home mom. It's literally, that's his profession. That's what he went to school for. That, so he is a very good resource for understanding what your rights are within the workforce and where your resources are, because that's what human resources is. um, so yeah, so that would be the difference between limitations and boundaries. So like we said before, boundaries are more like how you want people to like communicate with you. I wrote down the types of boundaries that are out there. There's physical, emotional, material, time slash energy, mental, and sexual. And I know for a fact my biggest issue, right, is, especially being a stay-at-home mom, is material, because people are always touching my stuff, and it drives me absolutely insane, because you put something in one space and they're gonna touch it. And I think, especially as parents, we have to be very, very, very serious about our boundaries and communicating them, because a lot of issues I see within parents is that they don't quite communicate them with their kids, and then they just lash out on them and punish them, and then the kids are left not quite understanding why they're getting in trouble, why mommy is getting so mad all the time, why daddy's flipping out all the time. And I think a lot of times people assume that people should just know our boundaries, and that's not reasonable either. You have to be clear and concise, and sometimes you don't think at the beginning of a relationship to list off your boundaries. Like, that's not a normal like thing to do. I think it's something that as situations arise, you just speak up for yourself and you say, hey, this is making me feel uncomfortable. Here is what I prefer. Another thing I really want to emphasize is try not to, if you want to keep the confrontation to a minimal and create like an actual conversation, don't sit there and say, well, it very accusing, like very accusational, you know what I mean? Don't create that kind of environment. Say that, you're crossing my boundary and this is what I prefer. This is what makes me feel more comfortable. This is why. Try to create a conversation where it's about you. I know that seems selfish and sounds selfish, but when you take the conversation and you bring it back to yourself, it creates more of a conversation between the two of you, and it makes it less like you're accusing them of being a narcissist or being mean or dismissive, because when you say those words, immediately, like, they don't want to listen, they don't want to have that conversation with you. You've already turned their prefrontal cortex off, and now they're in fight or flight. Now they're ready to fight you because you triggered them. And we all have triggers, and that is the first one, accusing someone when they're not intentionally trying to hurt you. Because if you're in a relationship, people are most likely not intentionally trying to hurt your feelings or cross your boundaries. People do it by mistake most of the time, unless you are legitimately with a narcissist, which some of you are. But for the most part, you have to be clear and concise about what your physical, emotional, material, time and energy. Like, you can't. Codependent relationship is people that do everything together. You have to separate yourself and your relationship and have you have to have like two separate lives. You have to be allowed to have your own hobbies and have your own friends group, and that's perfectly acceptable and okay. For you to do everything together and expect someone to just want to do everything and only talk to you and your friends, that is not okay. That's crossing major boundaries, and that's going into codependency behavior, which is not healthy at all. That would be considered unhealthy boundaries, and venturing into control, which is a trauma response. So like, maybe you had issues back when you were younger and you feel a need to control other people. That's something that you need to work on. That's not your partner being narcissistic. It's something that you need to work on within you. So what would you like to say about types of boundaries and why they're important?
Well, I think you've covered all the types, and in a future episode, if people are interested, we can delve further into each type of boundary, because there, as you've listed, are several, and each one of them could probably take up its own episode. But I feel that it's important to have these boundaries because we want to think the best of people. We want to believe that people aren't going to intentionally violate your boundaries. But at the end of the day, you have to be realistic as well and understand that some people, due to whatever circumstance they might be dealing with. It could be trauma, they could just be someone that likes pushing boundaries. You're going to find people who want to push your boundaries or outright violate them. And if you communicate that, then you've set a standard for that person to understand. So if they do intentionally or hopefully unintentionally push or violate those boundaries, you can reinforce those boundaries and communicate with them again. Hey, I'm not a fan of this. This is my boundary. If you don't set that precedent, then it leaves yourself more vulnerable than you really want to be. Physically, your space could be invaded. Emotionally, you may feel manipulated, and on with the different kinds of boundaries. It's about not only protecting yourself, but protecting others by protecting those relationships that we hopefully hold near and dear to us, and can establish new relationships and grow together through a mutual respect of one another's boundaries. We've had this conversation a couple times because one of the things I want to understand about people is what their limitations are, what their boundaries are, so that I never even unintentionally violate anyone's boundaries. So, what would you say to our listeners or some of your boundaries?
My boundaries, specifically about being touched. I think a lot of times it's weird. It's always been a weird thing for me because I'm not a touchy-feely person. And so when people just assume that they can touch me, it throws me off. And maybe that is a trauma response, or maybe I just have I'm an autonomous person. And I think that's something that you should ask. Like, is it okay if I hug you? You know, unless you're my family member, I don't think it's appropriate to just touch me. And especially as a woman, I feel like it's very important for me to set that boundary because, I've had situations, even at the workplace, where someone grabbed my hips to get by me and stuff like that. And I just don't feel like that's appropriate. So I think, especially and men too, my partner has had issues, especially we're from New York. And in the city, people don't have boundaries, I swear. Like and he used to be a bartender. He's had many times where even men or women will just grope him, touch his butt, or, literally he's had his, parts touched, and it makes him very uncomfortable. And like, I'm grateful for some reason. I think I have RBF. I have that face where like people kind of like don't feel comfortable doing stuff like that with me. And so I'm grateful for that in a way, because I've seen it happen with women just standing there and a guy will walk by and touch her butt or something. And I'm not the type of person to keep my mouth shut. Like, I've had to learn to keep my mouth shut now that I live in Texas and anybody can just have a gun. But in New York, I was very outspoken. If I saw something that I thought was inappropriate, I'm the first one to say, don't touch her like that, or don't touch him like that. Or, did you ask? Is that okay? Like, you can't just assume anything. You have to ask questions before you do things, because you never know. You have no idea what somebody's going through, and it's just inappropriate. It absolutely is inappropriate to just touch people. So that's one thing. And then, like, here in my house, well, and within my friends too, is just respect. Like, certain things you can't know what's gonna trigger somebody all the time, but there's certain things that you just kind of are common sense that you don't do or you don't say, and stuff like that. And some people weren't raised to understand respect and boundaries, so they don't understand that you shouldn't say certain things to some people, and making fun of people is not an appropriate way to like have a conversation. Like, I always thought that was weird. I had a couple of friends back from where we used to live in York, where they just like, that was all their conversation was about, was just always talking about other people, making fun of them. And for me, that's a boundary. It's like, I'm not interested in talking and making other people feel small to make myself feel big. I want to hear about your dreams and aspirations and your goals and what your kid did yesterday, or, a funny thing that happened at work. I don't want to hear about, how someone looks funny or someone talks funny, or, it's disrespectful. So a huge thing for me is just respect. Like, respect me, respect other people, and we won't have a problem. And then my time and energy, that's super important for me. I am a very like kind of personal person. I like my alone time. I know I don't get much of it because I'm a stay-at-home mom, but I do expect, like if you see me scrolling on Facebook, you know, you can say hi, but like don't assume that I want to talk to you in my DMs. And if you message me in my DMs, I check my DMs like maybe once every 2 weeks. So like don't get mad at me for not responding to you. I'm trying to get better with it on my business. On my business page, I'll be more quick to respond to you. But I do vet those out. Like I look at them, and if it's not a you know, if it's just like someone trying to hit on me or something, like I'm not going to respond to you. I have a partner. I think that's disrespectful for me to carry on a conversation. Like that's a boundary right there. You know, within a relationship is, you know, someone's having sexual advances, you don't entertain those if you're in a relationship. That's a huge boundary that I think, especially nowadays, gets crossed. Is you say thank you, I'm not interested. I have to do that a lot, like in public, like no, you know, thank you, I appreciate the compliment, but I do have a partner and I don't think he would be happy about that. I probably say that 500 times a day when I, especially when I lived in Rochester. But you know, things like that, that's not a unhealthy boundary to have. You know, people need to respect that, you know. And for the most part, when I tell people I have a partner, a lot of men are respectful of it. I don't think, maybe like once or twice have I run into an issue where a man like continuously persisted and was like, oh, you know, I could do better, I could be better for you, blah 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 blah. Like I've had that happen very seldomly, but I know other women say that they deal with that a lot. So, you know, that's not an appropriate thing to do. If a man or a woman says, I have a partner, you say, oh, you know, I'm sorry, you know, and go on your way. And you don't have to take it personally. You don't have to get so defensive about it. Just, you know, they're communicating a boundary and you just say, okay, and you keep it moving. There's no hard feelings. There's no hard feelings that need to come out of that. What are your boundaries?
So we've talked about trauma and how those experiences can mold us. And I can tell you without hesitation that some of my boundaries come as a result of my upbringing and the trauma that's come from it. I think one of the keys about really stating your boundaries is understanding why you have them and where they've come from. So I'm about respect, and I have no tolerance at all at this point in my life for anyone who's going to curse at me with venom, who will raise their voice without justification or scream at me. That's one example. I do value my time and my space, but I'm more than willing to share that with other people. There just needs to be respect on that end of things as well. If I'm going to offer that up, then engage with me actively. Don't be on your phone. If you need to check it, you need to take a call, just let me know. Don't be, you know, nose in your phone the whole time when you have established with me that you want to have attention given to you, because at that point I feel like I'm flexing my boundary, and if I allow it to continue, then I am playing a role in allowing for it to be fully violated. And that's another thing that people should understand about boundaries. If someone violates it, you need to call them out on it. If you don't, you're allowing that behavior to happen. I've told one of my friends, Greg, that he is wonderful, but he needs to understand that I am willing to flex my boundaries to a certain extent so they are not fully violated or broken in order to protect my higher priority boundaries, which are, as I've stated, just that respect angle. It's okay. You have to make compromises in life. If you flex your boundaries, it doesn't mean you failed. It doesn't mean that you're not showing yourself value. We all have to make compromises in our life, sometimes more than we'd like. But if one of your boundaries is like mine, where you want to avoid unnecessary conflict, even though we're all going to encounter conflict at some point in our lives, then do what you have to do. Because at the end of the day, before you can show love to others, you have to show love and value to yourself. And part of that is establishing those boundaries, understanding them, and communicating them.
Absolutely. And I wanted to read, because I also wrote down like the top reasons why people struggle so much with setting boundaries or communicating them. And they are fear of abandonment. If someone has abandonment issues, maybe their parents didn't spend time with them, or like for me, I grew up in a boarding school away from my family for most of my life, and I moved around a lot, and friends didn't last, constantly people coming in and out of my life my whole life. So I had that issue for sure. So I was a people pleaser, always trying to accommodate everybody in my life. And that comes from abandonment issues. And I know a lot of people struggle with that if they haven't done their trauma and inner child work. And, that was huge in my 20s. I think everybody goes through this period between like 20s, graduating high school to like 27, where they don't even know what boundaries are, and they're trying to figure out what their likes and dislikes are and who they are as a person. And so, abandonment is a big, big one issue. Some people, like I said, I didn't even know what boundaries were. No one ever in my life ever, I heard of rules and guidelines at work, like, a manager shouldn't be going out and having drinks with their employees and stuff like that all the time, every day, and becoming best friends, because that can show favoritism and stuff. But other than that, I had never heard of boundaries. No one had ever brought up that word until I was much, much older, and I started studying psychology. And then I was like, oh crap, like I got some work to do. And sometimes it's a low self-worth. You don't think you're worthy of that respect, and that's really, really sad. I see a lot of really sweet, kind, empathetic people who just don't know how to say no, and don't know how to communicate a boundary because they are so scared of the backlash. And how you said, fear of not a fear, but you kind of like don't want a unnecessary conflict. I'm the opposite. I'm ready to fight, which I that's something I had to heal. I'm a fighter. I have like little person syndrome, as some people might call it. Like, and I'm also Puerto Rican. Like, it's just in my culture to like we were kind of like the quote. I know you don't like cursing, and I apologize, but I'll adjust it. But mess around and find out. That should be written on my forehead, okay? Because I feel like I'm a very, especially now as as I've grown and understood what my boundaries are. If I communicate them with you, I am not the person to bend. Like, I've let you know, and so I'm going to continue to enforce them, and I'm very, very strong about it. Especially if it's multiple times. The first time it's like, okay, it's cute, whatever, your mistake. But at a certain point, it's like, okay, and I've had to tell partners this, like, the more I allow you to do this to me, the more I'm saying that it's okay, and it's not okay. I do not like this. I don't feel comfortable with this. And I have to tell my friends that too. It's like, no, you let people, when you let people do stuff to you, you're telling them, you're giving them permission to treat you however they want. And it's not okay. Holding stuff in and just to appease and avoid conflict hurts you, not the other people. The other people get to manipulate and walk all over you, and they're having the best time of their lives. And then you're over there just ruminating and stressing, and it can bring up anxiety disorders. I had a severe anxiety disorder because I was trained to shut up. In my boarding school and in my first marriage, I couldn't get even a word out. Every time I tried to stick up for myself, I got in trouble. I was yelled at. I was told that I was being too much, or and I'm glad that since then, and since I got, I left my last relationship, I was able to not have to worry about that. I have a relationship where he might not like what I have to say, but he listens, and and after like about a day, he'll come, and everything is fine. And I see the changes. I see him trying to respect my boundaries and trying to respect my space more, which I appreciate. And I think that's the difference between a healthy relationship and an unhealthy one, because before it was just whatever, I'm allowed to do whatever I want, and then this is, it's all about me. Definitely was dating a narcissist. Right, so this next section, what I want to talk about is what are healthy boundaries and how to communicate them with other people with our children, bodies, relationships, and in the workplace. For me personally, with children, that's the I won't lie, it's the hardest thing to do because kids will make you feel like the biggest piece of crap for saying no. They they will throw the biggest tantrums, and if you are truly a really hardcore empathetic person like I am, I've cried. Like I've literally had to like take myself out of the situation and like cool down and cry because I feel bad. Like, my biggest boundaries within my household are I don't allow children in my bedroom because there's too many things in there they can get into. I have makeup and perfume and stuff like that, and just my stuff, and they break. Kids are notorious for breaking things, and so I've had a lot of issues when in our relationship before where my boyfriend kind of just didn't care because in his family that the bedroom was not off limits, where I was brought up where no one went into the adults bedrooms, like that was so taboo. Like, so when we had our kids and he just let the kids come in the room, I was like so appalled. So um little things like just letting them know where it's okay to play, what is it okay to do, that they need to ask before they touch certain things or do certain things. Like you want to teach them to be responsible little people and to have independence, but you also need to explain to them that when they cross these rules and boundaries that there are consequences. And I'm not talking beat your children, I'm not talking scream at them until you're blue in the face. I'm talking like, hey, you do this and you're going to get this taken away for a certain amount of time. With me, I have 3 kids, like I have a set of twins and one that's slightly older, only 10 months older. And so for me, I have to separate one from the others because if I try to like, I don't know, I don't understand like some of the parenting advice out here. Like it just doesn't work for my household. It just doesn't. I can't keep my eye on all 3 of them at the same time. So I have to separate them. And I do send one to their room for some time. Like you need to think about it. And then we have conversations about it. I know some gentle parenting, conscious parenting people are going to scream and, oh, I can't believe you do that to your child. But it's what works for our household. And my kids, they know that if they cross the boundaries, they break something that they shouldn't have been touching to begin with, they draw all over my walls. They've done that several times. They will climb anything. So they know now that there are consequences to their actions. And I think that is so important to cultivate in a child at a young age, is that there's consequences to every action. And that's what having boundaries is with children, and making them clean up their messes. I know some people are like, oh my gosh, like you have to let your children be children. That has nothing to do with making them clean up after themselves. If my kids, actually today, I don't even know how my youngest son, he somehow got a hold of a red marker, and thank gosh that they're washable Crayola markers. But he drew within 5 minutes, because he literally just left my bedroom. He's hanging out with me, went out into the living room. Next thing I know, his twin sister's coming in telling me that he's drawing all over the floor. Like 5 minutes. And I come out and the whole area in front of where his favorite spot is covered in red marker. And so, gosh darn it, I went and I got the spray and I sprayed it on the floor and I made him mop it up, because that's teaching him responsibility. That's teaching him, hey, if I make a big mess, I have to clean it up, and maybe I shouldn't do it next time. So, and that's what communicating boundaries is all about. Is you have to say to someone, hey, I am not going to continue to participate in this conversation if you continue to disrespect me or cross my boundary. I'm not going to come back to this place if you continue to touch me, or, things like that. There has to be a consequence. I know people, like I said, people don't like to hear about consequences, but people need to understand that there are consequences to your actions, or else they cultivate an entitlement. They feel entitled to your things. They feel entitled to your space, to your time, to your money, to everything. So when you teach them that there's reasonable consequences to their actions, they learn that I shouldn't do this. And it becomes a natural habit for them, and they don't have to even think about it. They just know, hey, my whole life, if I did this, this is what happened, so I'm not going to do that. And it's going to help them with their relationships when they get older. Within relationships, healthy boundaries would be just, you know, I guess it'd be easier to say what are unhealthy boundaries, because like I said, healthy boundaries within a relationship, that's such a situational and personal thing. But unhealthy boundaries would be never allowing your spouse to touch or look into your phone or your devices. Like, I think that's weird. I made a post about that earlier today. I think that's really weird. Like granted, you do want to have your own personal thing. So for me, that would be my like journals and diaries. Like, I've communicated very clearly that don't go through those things. But my phone is open book. My partner, same thing. We have each other's passcodes and we use each other's phones. If his phone is closest to me, I grab it and I use it. If I need a calculator or to look something up real quick, take a picture of the kids doing something funny, and vice versa. It's never been a fight or a weird thing. I think that's really, like I said, I think that would be an unhealthy boundary. That means that usually means that you're hiding something, and it's all about having integrity within a relationship. If you should be whatever. If you're having conversations that you don't want your partner to see, then there's a problem there. That's not healthy at all. Another unhealthy boundary would, like I said before, would be simply not letting like, for instance, this me a lot being able to have this podcast with you as another male. If my partner were to ever tell me that this was an issue, it would be over. That's not a healthy boundary to me. I should be allowed to have male friends. Now, if you were to cross that boundary and start having sexual advances towards me, then I would end that relationship as a friend. You know what I mean? Because that's crossing a boundary too. But for us to just have a mutual passion, like helping people in mental health and giving support to each other when we feel that we need it. Like, if you need a friend to talk to, I should be allowed to have male friends and you should be allowed to have female friends until the point that there's an issue there. And I have had issues where a male expressed they wanted something more while I was in a relationship, and I had to tell them, like, I'm sorry, but we are friends. And they didn't respect that, and they continued to push the issue. So I had to block them and not allow them into my life anymore, because that's always been weird to me, because I'm always very clear. Like, I've been one to like cross that boundary. I always make things very clear, like, you are just a friend to me. Or, if I'm in a relationship, I kind of just assume that people just know to respect, but I'm starting to learn that that's not always the case. So I think I do give people the benefit of the doubt, and I communicate with them first before I cut them off. I think everybody's kind of live in a cutoff culture where everybody's just like, oh, you disrespected me, so I'm never going to talk to you again. That's I actually looked that up in a psychology website to see if that's like a healthy thing, and that's considered an unhealthy boundary. It's just cutting people off. You have to communicate these things so that people know that they are doing something wrong. You can't assume that they know. So those are my big ones. Like I said, absolutely boundaries with kids and enforcing them, and you have to continue. With kids, there is no you have to continue to let them know, because their whole life is about pushing boundaries. That's kind of like their job, because they're trying to figure out what they're allowed to do and what the world is about and what being human is. So it's very normal for them to push your boundaries. It's very normal for them to test and see what they can get away with. And the more you allow them to get away with, the more like I said, sense of entitlement that they will cultivate, and that's not healthy, and that's not going to help them. What about you? Which ones do you have? Any ones that are different that you'd like to share?
Well, I have similar boundaries, but from a human resources perspective, you can have boundaries within the workplace. They just, like in your personal life, they have to be reasonable. There may be situations where people are not going to get along in the workplace, but if you're on a team, you're expected to work together. And unless there's been some sort of line crossed in the realm of professional behavior, you have to find some way to work with that person. I think it's an unreasonable boundary to expect to be able to have space from someone just because your energy isn't matching the ways that you would really like it to be. You've signed on for this job. If it crosses an unprofessional line, then of course come to HR, speak to your supervisor, and people can see what can be done about it if anything can be done. But at the end of the day, you have to try to find a way to respect one another. You, within certain workplaces, have to also understand that English is the primary language utilized for safety reasons. We live in a very diverse country. Heck, here in Austin, it's very diverse, but until the laws change, English is the language utilized for safety purposes. So, one of the things that they will look for during interview processes, both in the public and private sector, is if you're able to communicate properly within times of safety. And if you cannot, then they may take away your job in the private sector. They may reassign you where safety is not a concern. Or in the public sector, if you have certified during the interview, same thing, because in many public sector jobs, you're put on a 6-month probation period. Or if you've already been part of the public sector and you transfer to another position, it's 90 days. You still are not protected. You have to be able to communicate. So I feel that from a professional viewpoint, until the laws change, we have to find that balance, and it's a reasonable boundary to be able to communicate in a way that will display what needs to be relayed to people. As far as my personal life, you've covered it. I think one of the boundaries that is so unusual for people to state having in this day and age is just coming down to biological sex and gender. We are social creatures. We are going to form relationships with people of the same and different genders and biological sex. That's just the way it is, unless you want to be a hermit. But even then, you're going to want to socially interact from time to time. The trust in a relationship is very important. And if you've never given your partner, your friend, whoever, any reason to distrust you, it's completely unreasonable to set as a boundary for people to not have relationships with people of the opposite sex or gender, what have you. It's fair because you're limiting that person in their growth, because we grow by interacting with one another. And you're actually setting a limitation for that person as well. And you should not be setting a limitation for that person. The person who has a limitation should be in charge of figuring out what their limits and limitations are and standing by it. It comes off as abusive, it comes off as controlling, and that just creates negativity and resentment within that relationship. So then the boundary may be that that person wants more time and space away from you. I understand that there may be trauma that people still need to process and heal from in their lives. But again, until trust actually becomes an issue, there's no reason to set any kind of boundary. And when it comes to space, you can set space and time boundaries, but you have to be reasonable and accommodating with that as well. For example, if you have to set time and space, have it be someplace that is not a common area. So don't go late at night and decide, oh, I want time and space in the bedroom if that person, your partner, has to go to sleep. That's not a reasonable boundary. Take time and space in your own safe space that is not a mutually shared area. Because again, it's just going to cause more issues in that relationship, and the relationship may end. And moving on to reinforcing boundaries, you may have to find a time, several times, sometimes in relationships, where you have to fight for control of your boundaries. You mentioned earlier, I don't like cursing. It's not cursing I don't like. You can curse like a sailor. It's just when people curse at me with venom without justification. And I
That's really
fight to reinforce my boundaries. If I've communicated, it's me being vulnerable, it's sharing of myself with you, something that I'm an open book, but someone might not know until I communicate it. That's how you get boundaries across to people. So if I'm willing to share that boundary with someone and communicate it, then the expectation is there's going to be a mutual respect there. If I understand that person's boundaries, I'm going to respect that. They're going to respect mine. And if they want to fuck around and find out with me, they can go ahead and violate my boundaries. As I said, I'm willing to be flexible, I'm willing to compromise, but don't outright violate my boundaries. It may not come off the way that someone else will, because I keep my emotions not in check, but I keep my anger in check. I have several different levels, and I don't think I've ever gotten above a level 3 in my entire life, because through trauma, I was told that you can't get angry. That's a negative emotion, despite the fact that anger is a healthy emotion. It's just how you utilize that emotion. So, first off, you might have to communicate again if someone is not respecting your boundaries. If you've communicated once, is enough to reinforce that. If it pleases you, you can continue to communicate, because some people, they just don't have an understanding. It takes time to learn. But again, once is enough. But I do believe it's important to communicate these boundaries verbally, because some people have different sensory relations than others. Some people have cognitive abilities that aren't the same as yours. So just try to put yourself in that person's shoes and communicate in a manner that they're going to be able to relate to. If you have, then again, reinforce it. If they're not getting it, then one of the newer boundaries can be that you just don't want to be around that person. If you don't have a choice, say you live with that person, or you have to be in relatively common contact with them, if they're going to continue to push your buttons, then play stupid games, win stupid prizes. You are not the villain
yeah.
for having to fight back. It is, at the end of the day, showing yourself love through reinforcing your boundaries is one of the most selfless things you can do. You do not have to be a people pleaser to the extent where you become a doormat. You need to be able to show yourself love and value so you can enhance and strengthen your ability to show love and value to the other people in your life.
Absolutely. It's just like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. So if you're constantly people pleasing and appeasing by everybody else's boundaries, but you never communicate your own and you never stand up for yourself, you're gonna feel so drained, and you're not gonna know who you are. I think it's a really good exercise to especially if you come out of a relationship, a codependent relationship, is to sit there and write down a list of things that you are not going to tolerate anymore. That but you have to, like I said before, communication is so important. I cannot stress that enough. I've noticed a lot, especially as a woman who talks to a lot of women from various backgrounds and ethnicities and cultures. We have, for some reason, and I know it's not just women, it's a male thing too, but I just happen to speak to more women about these issues, is we kind of assume that men are supposed to know these things, and they don't. They have their own, we are humans, but we have kind of two different cultures. And men, what they do with each other is a little bit different than what women, well, not really, because women are kind of different animals with when they're with their own gender. And then same with genderless people and trans people. Like, there's a culture that you need to respect, and but you can't expect everybody to just know what your boundaries are and what your expectations are. You have to communicate with them, especially if it's your first time. And sometimes someone who's not, like, I'm not super involved in the LGBTQ plus community, so I don't know what the rules and word verbiage that should, I try to stay up to date. I try to immerse myself. I watch videos because I want to understand different perspectives. I want to learn these things. Even the autistic community has, like, you don't want to use the word Asperger's, or you don't want to say I have autism. You want to say autistic person because they get offended. So it's just little things like this. You can't expect people to just know, because there's so many different cultures and traumas and environments that led to different boundaries. You can't expect everybody to just know what your boundaries are and what your expectations are. You have to communicate them, and not take things so personally, because usually people are not out here to try, there are mean people out there who will push buttons just to get a reaction out of you. But for the most part, I know for me, I've had a lot of situations where people thought I was being mean, or not being empathetic. I'm very empathetic, and if someone tells me that they have an issue with something I'm doing, I feel bad. I truly do. I will apologize, and it will eat at me for days. And that's something I need to work on, because I shouldn't beat myself up for things that I didn't intentionally try to harm somebody. But you just have to let me know if I'm crossing a boundary, if I'm maybe not using words that are appropriate to you, whatever you have subscribed to, whatever gender you have chosen. Just let me know. Let the people around you know. Not everybody is, you can't expect us all to know every pronoun and label and everything else that's out there. Some of us try. Like I said, I do. I legitimately I'm such a nerd, and I'm always trying to understand human behavior and psychology of people. So I ask questions and I watch videos and trying to understand different experiences, even mental health. I watch interviews of people having psychotic episodes and stuff like that, just so I can know. I'd like to understand body language. So I watch their body language. And so I know when someone's offended. I know when someone is maybe feeling uncomfortable. And so I make it a point to, like, because some people are scared to bring up their boundaries. I'll stop everything I'm doing. Are you okay? But you can't expect that from everybody. I'm just an oddball who is, trying to accommodate way too many people. And I take the time, and, considering I want to be somebody within the mental health field, I just feel like that's something that I should be, what is it called, immersing myself in and getting familiar with. But the average person is not going to put in this much work and not going to immerse themselves into all these different personalities and cultures and environments, and they shouldn't have to. You shouldn't expect that of everybody. There's just, people have their own goals and values that they want to live by, and so you just communicate clear and concisely. Don't beat around the bush and make it unclear, because I've seen that. That's my biggest pet peeve with people, especially within relationship friendships and romantic relationships, is when people like kind of beat around the bush, and they don't. You have to be clear and concise with me. You have to just let me know. I'm not going to get offended. The only time I get upset is, like I said, when people accuse me of being disrespectful or mean, when that wasn't what I was trying to do. Like, sometimes, I haven't done it lately. When I was really, really young, my boarding school, there was like no limits. We kind of, like, it was pretty rough because there was a bunch of kids that were like from the hood. We got lucky enough to get qualified to go to this beautiful school and get this wonderful education, but we were all from like hardcore backgrounds. Like, there was kids there being sold as sex slaves, like orphans. Like, it was a rough crowd. So what I learned after I graduated from there is, like, holy crap, like, the stuff that we used to say to each other was horrible, and we shouldn't be saying that to other people. And that's, it's a lot of things that were normalized there within our culture of damaged and abandoned children is not something that I should take out into the world, and that the world is a completely different place, and that there's rules and boundaries and I had a respect for adults and authority, but I didn't really necessarily have that same kind of respect and for people, my peers. And I had to learn that. And I learned it the hard way by pushing people away. People didn't want to be near me. And, I felt bad about it for a while, but then I real, you have to sit there and self-reflect and be like, what am I doing that's causing these people to not like me and not want to be around me and to get so offended by me? And, once again, you have to let people be them too. You don't want people to mask around you and feel like they have to walk on eggshells. So it's really important to just communicate. Communication is the biggest thing that I feel like is lacking in the world. Is we just assume that everybody should just know everything, and because we don't realize that we've surrounded ourselves in a certain environment, in a certain world, in a certain language, and slang even, and that even varies from city to city. Even you say fag here and that can be a offensive word, but you say fag in the UK and that's a cigarette. So that's something, you have to also not get so offended and just be like, hey, here in the United States, we don't say that, and this is why. And say it in a nice way, and they might think it's ridiculous, but it's we have to respect other people's cultures and other people's boundaries. It's as simple as that. Before we do our closing, is there anything else you would like to say?
Well, I think you've covered a lot. Communication is important. At the end of the day, respect is important. Being open to that
Mm-hmm.
experience. I don't believe there are any true masters within this world, because you can always learn something new. You can always grow in a different way. You can always evolve as a person. Yes, you could be an expert in one field or another, but there's always something new, something brilliant to learn. And boundaries are one of those things that we should really take to heart to learn about people, especially when we live in a world now where people are willing to set boundaries for themselves to communicate with other people. It does not hurt to just reach out and ask someone what their boundaries are. It does not hurt to have a deeper understanding of people, because if we do, we're going to discover that we're not alone in it, that we can have a better understanding not only of other people, but of ourselves. And with relation to that, going back to it, you have to be open to learning that. You have to recognize that even if you've had one perspective or one belief, seeing a different way is not you questioning your entire belief system. I use words that people might find offensive, but I use them by the dictionary definition. About 3 weeks ago, I was having a conversation in the Discord, and I was talking about my pug Monty, and I will use the word bipolar to mean one extreme or another, not signifying the medical condition of being bipolar, but someone brought up that they felt that that could be seen as offensive. So I took that as an opportunity to learn that that was a boundary that should be respected for that particular person. I have also used the word queer, not in reference to the LGBT community, but to mean odd or mysterious. And I'm not use that in reference to a person, but I have used it in reference to situations. And I think that's the key there with wording. You should be able to understand that not everyone uses phrases or words the same way. If you are offended by something, as Lauren has so brilliantly said, communicate that. not everyone is going to think something is common sense. There are different cultures, there are different people out there. We need to be willing to expand our point of view. And it really does just come down to that respect and communication piece.
Oh my gosh, I love it so much that you brought up the fact that different words, like I know I brought it up with just one example, but you like really went into it, how words can mean different things to different people. I know it shouldn't be that way, and we would love to live in a world where everything is so black and white and words, this is what this means and that's it, but we don't live in that world. We live in a beautiful, colorful, multidimensional world where people have different meanings for things, and there's different lingos. And I don't know how many times I've run into situations like that too, where you know, certain phrases or words, I have a certain meaning for them, but the other person does not. And how many times that has gotten me in trouble. And you can't expect someone to just like completely change who they are to appease you. But it is safe to say, hey, within this community, don't say that. And that's fair. I think that's fair. And both sides shouldn't get offended, have that conversation, and just noted, within this. And I've had this conversation with other people before where like people say I'm fake sometimes because it's not, I'm always Lauren, I'm always who I am, but I understand, when I'm talking to executives, I want to use a certain kind of language. When I'm talking to my friends, I use a certain kind of language. When I talk to people I have never met before, I use a different kind of language. I'm a little bit more objective because I have no idea what their boundaries are and what might cross it. And I do try to my best to not, if I know something's highly offensive with a majority of people, I'm not going to go and throw it out there. And sometimes it might not make sense to you, and sometimes you might think it's stupid or whatever. You think whatever you want in your head, but don't tell somebody your boundary is stupid or the way you use words is dumb or something. Just okay, I get it, and there's going to be cognitive dissonance. Your brain is going to go, whoa, like, what is this? And it's going to try to fight back. Like I said, especially if you have not worked through your triggers and you have a little bit of anger and, within you, it might come out. So always important, if you feel that within your body, your heart starts to race because someone has said something, that's an issue. And it's not an issue with them, it's an issue with you. And you need to take a couple breaths and think about it and say, hey, if someone was saying something that I was offended by, I would be upset. So that's where it's coming from. It's coming from a place of cross boundaries or a respect issue, and to not take it so to heart. And if you have to leave for a second and come back so that you can come from a space of love and understanding, that's okay too. Both parties need to understand that, sometimes that's needed. I know for me, when I'm in a heated conversation, I absolutely need to take a step back, and as soon as I feel it in my body, I remove myself from the situation, because when we're upset or triggered, our prefrontal cortex shuts off, and which is our filter, and we start saying things that we would never say at a normal when we are out of our, dysregulation. Our nervous system gets off balance, and we, how they call it in nowadays in the wellness community, unaligned. When you become unaligned and something doesn't match up with your view of the world, and your chakras are all over the place, that's it's going to happen. It's going to happen several times in a day. It's going to happen at your workplace because there's a bunch of different people from that have different viewpoints and ways of talking to people. And what he said earlier is absolutely correct. Sometimes you go to the bathroom, take a couple breaths, get your heart rate back down. I'm working right now on a stress and anxiety workbook that's super informative, that'll help you recognize the signs within your body, so that you just have to come back into your body and realize what's happening, so that you can know that you need to break away, or maybe you just need to take a deep breath. Like eventually it'll get to a point where you just have to sigh, and that's also activating your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your calming hormones, which will then allow you to turn your prefrontal cortex back on and be like, okay, let's have a reasonable conversation about this. But absolutely, like I said, we'll talk all about that on another episode. But as for today, I am so happy to have you, and be able to have these wonderful conversations. And for the viewers or listeners out there, I hope you learned something new or you feel validated in your feelings, because I know boundaries is a huge conversation right now and a big miss with throughout the world. So I hope, you know, you feel like you learned something or that you can take away from this conversation and go out into the world and feel a little bit more confident about asserting yourself and speaking up for yourself, and not shaming yourself or allowing other people to shame you. You know, don't let anybody make you feel bad for sticking up for yourself. You are worthy and you deserve respect and love and acceptance for who you are, no matter how you want to present yourself in the world. You know, just because I don't agree or I don't subscribe to whatever it is you're doing doesn't mean I shouldn't respect you. That's not how that works. And I think some people are, you know, they're quick to say, well, I don't believe in that too, and they'll dismiss your feelings or your, you know, whatever you believe in, and that's not fair either. So I do want to close this out real quick by saying our little legal disclaimer, because we said it in our very intro, but we did not say it in our last episode by mistake. That was my fault. I kind of like cut it off. So real quick, Lauren Rose and Stephen Ellis are not licensed mental or physical health professionals and are not licensed to treat or diagnose any health conditions. All information and advice that we shared within this episode are based off of our own research, understanding of studies conducted, because I did do some research on this because I want to make sure that I'm giving good advice and not just biased advice. And also that we are sharing from our personal lived experiences. Although we use psychological, medical, or other scientific studies as reference, the information we provide is not to be used to replace licensed physician's advice, but rather to be used in conjunction with your healthcare provider's instructions. We highly recommend that you confer with and seek medical mental health care if needed. Never, ever ignore your body's responses to any new activity. So I want to emphasize with this boundaries, especially if you feel that your boundaries are being crossed and you're feeling drained by a certain person, you need to get out of that situation. And I understand that especially with this economy, we can't just move into a new house. We can't just get a new job so easily. I understand that. But you need to start making steps towards that. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you all have a good day. Bye.
Hi, everyone.